The text came in at 4 minutes past 7 on a Tuesday while I was standing in my own wine room with a clipboard in my hand. I felt the phone buzz against the counter and I glanced down without picking it up, the way you do when you already know who it is and you already know the shape of what they want. It was my Aunt Beverly. She did not call often. She called the way some people use a fire extinguisher, only when something needed to be put out. And the thing she needed to put out, that night, was the possibility of me. I want you to picture the room I was standing in, because it matters. Low brick ceiling, racks of bottles in their soft amber light, the hum of the cooling system that I had personally signed the invoice to replace the winter before. Above me, 2 floors up, the private dining room sat empty and ready, its long table set for 26, the good glasses out, the window at the head of it holding the last orange of the evening. I knew every inch of that building. I knew the squeak in the 3rd stair and the name of the man who came to fix the squeak and the name of his daughter. I had bought the place a little over a year earlier, and I had told no one in my family, because telling them had never, not once in my entire life, made me more welcome anywhere. I read the text standing up. It said, and I can quote it exactly because I read it more times than I am proud of, "Hi, hun. Just so there's no awkwardness. The reunion this year is a close family thing, immediate family and the kids. I didn't want you driving all that way for nothing. You understand?" I had spent 20 years learning the exact shape of those 2 words. They were the family's favorite tool, smooth from use, worn to fit the hand. They did not mean, "Do you comprehend?" They meant, "Do not make me say the rest of it." And I always had understood, which was the trouble. I had understood so well for so long that I had taught myself to be gracious about being erased, the same way my mother had taught me, the same way her family had taught her. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished counting the Sancerre. I wrote the number on the clipboard. My hand did not shake, and I noticed that it did not shake, and that small fact was the first crack in something I had been carrying so long I had stopped feeling its weight. Because here's the part Beverly did not know. Here's the part none of them knew. The reunion she was so carefully keeping me out of was booked for the entire upstairs of Lindenhall, and Lindenhall was mine. I did not decide anything that Tuesday. I want to be honest about that. I did not stand in my wine room and hatch a plan. I poured myself half a glass of the wine I had just counted, and I drank it slowly, and I thought about my mother. And then I went home and slept badly and woke up and ran my business for 10 more days, the way I had run it for years. And the reunion sat on the calendar, the way a stone sits at the bottom of a glass of water, not doing anything, just being there, changing the level of everything around it. Then the night came, and I went. I told myself I was going to be calm. I told myself I would walk in and be seen, and that would be the whole of it. I parked across the street, in the lot I owned, in the spot that had my initials painted on the curb because the valet captain had insisted. And I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the warm gold light coming out of the 2nd-floor windows of my restaurant, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of my family enjoying themselves inside a room I had paid for. Without me. I went up the front steps. The host at the podium was a young woman named Priya, whom I had hired in the fall, and when she saw me, her face did a complicated thing, because she knew me as the owner, and she also had a private party upstairs under the name Stroud, and she was clever enough to feel a collision coming before she could name it. "Good evening," I said. "I'm here for the upstairs." "Of course," she said, and then carefully, "The Stroud party?" "That's the one," I said. She did not ask me for my name. She knew my name. She walked me to the foot of the stairs, the ones with the squeak in the 3rd step, and I climbed them alone, and at the top there was a set of double doors with frosted glass, and behind the glass there were the shapes of my whole family, blurred and laughing, and I stood there for one breath with my hand not quite on the door. I had spent 20 years learning the exact shape of a door closing in my face. I knew the sound of it the way you know a song you hate, every note of it, the little click at the end. I expected, even then, even standing in my own building, to be turned around. Some part of me, the oldest part, the 12-year-old part, was braced for a hand on my shoulder and a soft voice saying, "Oh, hun, this is family only." I opened the door. The room was loud and bright and full. My Aunt Beverly sat near the head of the long table in a green dress, holding court, a fork lifted halfway to her mouth. My Uncle Stuart was beside her, quieter, the way he had always been quieter. My cousin Brett was telling a story with both hands. My cousin Colleen was refilling someone's water. Down at the far end, the younger ones clustered, the kids and the almost grown, and among them a girl I barely recognized, who would turn out to be Nina, Colleen's daughter, who had been 8 the last time anyone let me near her and was 24 now. For a half second, nobody saw me, and then a few of them did, and the laughter near the door stuttered, and I watched the old machine begin to turn, the one that would soon produce from somewhere the words, "Family only," because that machine never failed. But before the machine could speak, a man crossed the room. Gabriel Moss had managed Lindenhall for 9 years, 4 of them before I bought it, and 5 of them after, and he was the best front-of-house man I had ever worked with, which is saying something, because I had spent my whole life in dining rooms. Gabriel could read a table the way a sailor reads water. He came across that crowded private room in his dark suit, unhurried, smiling the particular warm smile he saved for regulars, and he reached the head of the long table, and he pulled out the chair at the very top of it, the one in front of the window, and he held it for me. "Right this way, ma'am," he said. "Your usual?" The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in waves, starting near me and rolling down the table, conversation falling away in patches as people turned to see why Gabriel Moss was holding the best chair in the house for the woman who had not been invited. My Aunt Beverly's fork came down against her plate with a small, clear sound, like a bell at the end of something. I want to tell you what I felt. And the truth is, I felt almost nothing dramatic. I felt the way you feel when a sentence you have been trying to remember finally arrives. Gabriel had not meant to detonate anything. He did not know these were the people who had spent 2 decades pretending I did not exist. He only knew that I came in most Thursdays and sat at the head of that table by the window with a glass of the Sancerre, and that the owner sits where the owner sits. And so when I walked into a private party, he did the most natural thing in the world. He gave me my chair. My aunt had been telling that table, who counted for as long as that table had existed. She had just been interrupted by a man pulling out a chair. I sat. I did not sit like a queen. I sat the way I sat every Thursday, easing the chair in, thanking Gabriel by name. And then I looked down the long, bright length of my own table at the faces of the people who had decided, before I was old enough to vote, that I was not family, and I did not say a single word. For once, I did not have to. Let me pull back from that room, because if you only see that room, you will misunderstand me. You will think this is a story about a clever trick, a woman springing a trap. It is not. The chair was not a trap. The chair was just the truth arriving on its own legs. And to understand why it landed the way it did, you have to understand who I actually was, underneath the version of me that family had been carrying around in their heads since before I could spell my own name. 3 days before the reunion, I had stood at the pass in the Lindenhall kitchen tasting a new sauce off the back of a spoon while Inez Cordova watched me with her arms folded. Inez had been my head chef for the whole year I had owned the place, and she had been the sous chef before that, passed over for the top job by the previous owner because she did not flatter him, and the first thing I had done after I signed the papers was give her the kitchen and double her budget. She had repaid me by making Lindenhall the best food in 3 counties. "More acid," I said. "It's beautiful, but it's sleepy." "That's what I told him," she said, meaning the line cook, and she said it loud enough for him to hear, and he grinned, because that is how a good kitchen talks. Tomas Ferreira was there too, leaning on the end of the pass with a tray balanced on his hip, telling me about his son's baseball game, and I knew the score and the inning and the name of the kid who had struck my employee's boy out, because that is the kind of thing you know when the people in a room are actually yours. That same night, before the dinner rush, I had done the thing I am best at, the thing that no degree can teach and no amount of money can buy. A couple had come in for an anniversary, their 40th, and the husband had told the host, quietly, that his wife had been unwell that spring, and that this was the first night out they had managed in months. By the time they reached their table, I had already moved them to the good banquette by the fireplace, already told Inez to send out the little squash soup the wife had loved on a visit 2 years before, which I remembered because I remember these things. And when the woman tasted it, her eyes filled, and she looked around the room as though it had been built for her. It had not. But for one evening, I could make her feel that it had, and that gift, the gift of making a stranger feel expected and held, was the single thing my whole childhood had handed me, and I had spent 20 years turning it into a life. The people who shared my blood had taught me, by their absence, exactly how it feels to walk into a room and not be wanted, and I had decided, somewhere around the age of 25, to spend the rest of my days making sure no one who walked into a room of mine would ever feel that way. Tomas knew the wine I liked. The kitchen knew I wanted the bread a little darker. The dishwasher, a quiet man named Hollis, who had been at Lindenhall longer than anyone. called me by my first name and asked after my weekend, and meant it. This was my family? I just had not yet finished admitting it to myself, because I was still, even then, holding a chair open in my heart for people who were never going to sit in it. I owned the building they were about to celebrate inside. I owned the chairs, the glasses, the long window, the squeaking stair, the painted spot on the curb. None of them knew, because telling them had never once made me more welcome. I had learned that lesson so early and so thoroughly that secrecy was not even a strategy anymore. It was just a habit, like locking a door you have never once seen anyone try to open. That same week, up in my office above the wine room, Joelle Brannigan had sat across my desk with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair and asked me plainly whether I was really going to walk into that reunion. Joelle had been my business partner for 12 years and my friend for a little longer. She had been there when I bought my first restaurant, a failing bistro called the Marigold, out of receivership when I was 25, with more nerve than money. She had watched me build 3 restaurants into 9, and she had watched me the whole time keep one hand pressed against the old bruise of my family, hoping it would heal if I just stopped poking it. "You don't owe those people a single minute," she said. "You know that, right? Not one." "I know," I said. "Then why?" I did not have a clean answer for her. The honest one was that I wanted to press the bruise one more time, to walk into a room those people controlled and see whether the wall was still there, the way you push on a sore tooth with your tongue, even though you already know what you will find. I did not say that. I said, "I just want to stand in the room once without knocking." She looked at me for a long moment over the top of her glasses, and then she let it go, because that is the other thing a real friend does. She tells you the truth once, and then she lets you make your own mistake, and she stays close enough to help you up. The woman they pitied ran the place they were renting to pity her in. I knew that, and the knowledge did not warm me the way you would think. It mostly made me tired, because I had not built any of it to win an argument with Beverly Stroud. I had built it because I was good at it, and because every room I made was a room where a person walking in alone would be handed a chair and a glass and a feeling of being expected. I had spent my life building the exact thing my family had never given me and handing it to strangers and going home. To understand the wall, you have to go back further than me. You have to go back to my mother. My mother was Frances Faulkner, and before she was a Faulkner, she was a Stroud, the third of 4 Stroud children, and she made the unforgivable mistake of falling in love with my father, who was a kind man with grease permanently under his nails and no college and no money and a laugh you could hear across a parking lot. The Strouds were not rich. That is the thing people always assume, that this kind of coldness comes from money, and sometimes it does. But my family had only the idea of money, the memory of a grandfather who had owned things, and the brittle, frightened snobbery of people guarding a status that was mostly imaginary. My father, with his honest hands, was a threat to the story they told about themselves. So they froze my mother out, slowly, politely, with the same 2 words they would later use on me. I remember the first time I understood it. I was 12. It was 1996, a Saturday, and my mother was at the kitchen counter with the phone tucked against her shoulder, and I watched her face go still in a way I had not seen before. She was learning from her own sister that there had been a family gathering the weekend before, a cousin's birthday, and that we had not been told, and that the reason we had not been told was being explained to her now as an oversight. A small thing, nothing to get upset about. She did not get upset. That was the lesson. She said, "Oh, of course, no, I understand." And she laughed a small laugh that I would spend the rest of my life recognizing in my own mouth. And she hung up, and she went back to slicing carrots, and she said to me without turning around, "Family is complicated, sweetheart. You learn to let the little things go." My mother taught me to be gracious about being left out. It is the only inheritance that family ever gave us, and she gave it to me with love, because she thought she was teaching me how to survive them. She was. It is just that surviving a thing and being free of it are not the same, and it took me 40 years in a restaurant to learn the difference. She died in 2002, in the spring, when I was 18. It was sudden, an aneurysm, no warning, here in the morning and gone by the afternoon. And at her funeral, the Strouds came, all of them in dark clothes, and my Aunt Beverly held me by both shoulders and looked into my face with wet eyes and told me that I would always have family, that I must never feel alone, that they were there for me now more than ever. And then the calls stopped. There was no fight. I have gone over it 1,000 times looking for the fight. The moment, the thing I said or did, and there is nothing there. There was just my mother, who had been the thin thread tying me to them, And when she was gone, the thread did not snap so much as simply end, the way a road ends at the edge of a field. The invitations that had been rare became non-existent. The holidays I had spent on the outer edge of became holidays I spent at work, by choice, eventually, because working on Thanksgiving in a warm, full restaurant was better than sitting by a phone that I had finally trained myself to stop watching. When my mother died, the thread that had been fraying just ended. No fight, no reason. Only a quiet you could mistake for peace if you did not live inside it. I was 20 when I started waiting tables at the Marigold, that failing bistro, and I discovered the only thing that ever felt like the opposite of the Strouds. I discovered that I was good with a room full of people. I could walk up to a table of strangers, and within a minute they were laughing, comfortable, glad to be there. I could remember that the man at table 6 was celebrating 30 years at his job, and the woman at table 9 was newly widowed and needed her water refilled without having to ask, without having to be a bother. I could make people feel expected. It was the one gift my exclusion had given me, the way a person who grows up hungry often grows up to feed everyone they love. The Marigold was a wreck when I took it over. The walls were the color of old smoke, and the previous owner had let the supplier accounts lapse, and the regulars had drifted away to newer places. And everyone I knew told me I was a fool, a 25-year-old waitress with no degree and a few $1,000s of savings, buying a sinking restaurant out of receivership. I remember the first night I stood in that empty dining room with the keys in my hand, terrified, and I remember thinking that the worst thing that could happen, failure, was a thing I already knew how to survive, because I had been surviving a quieter version of it my whole life. There's a strange freedom in being raised by people who expect nothing of you. You stop performing for an audience that left long ago, and you find out what you would build if no one were watching at all. So I built. I painted the walls myself, on my knees in the corners at 2 a.m. I learned the books. I learned the suppliers. I learned that a restaurant is not really about food. It is about how a person feels in the 40 seconds after they walk through the door, and that the feeling can be engineered with light and warmth and a host who looks up and says, "We have your table ready," as though you had been expected all along. I gave strangers every single night the thing my family had refused me, and the strangers came back, and they brought their friends, and the Marigold filled up, and then it overflowed. By 2009, I had bought the Marigold's lease out of receivership. By 2014, I had 3 places, and I had met Joelle. Somewhere in there, the family started a group chat in 2016, and I was never added to it, and I did not even learn it existed until 2 years later when a cousin mentioned it offhand at the one funeral I was, by accident of timing, present for. There is a particular feeling that comes with learning there is a running conversation among the people who share your blood, a daily stream of birthdays and photos and small jokes, and that it has been flowing for 2 years without you, and that no one ever once thought we should add Adrian. It is not a sharp pain, it is a dull one, and dull pains are the ones that last. In 2018, there was a wedding. I found out about it from a photograph, posted publicly by mistake, my cousin in a white dress on the lawn of a country club 40 minutes from my house, surrounded by every Stroud alive, and not one of them had told me. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask Beverly about it, weeks later, I got the voicemail I would keep for years, not to torture myself, but because some part of me needed the evidence, needed to be able to prove to myself that I had not invented it. "Oh, honey," the voicemail said, in Beverly's warm, smooth, terrible voice. "It was such a small thing, family only. You understand. You understand. 2 words that did 20 years of work. So now you know the wall. Now you know it was not built in a night, and it was not built by one person, and it was not built out of hatred, which would have been easier to forgive. It was built out of comfort. It was more comfortable for them to not have me there, with my honest-handed father in my face and my mother's mistake in my blood. And so over 20 years, they had bricked me out one polite oversight at a time, and they had used mortar made of 2 words, and they had genuinely, sincerely come to believe that the wall had always been there, and that I was the one standing on the wrong side of it by some natural law. And here's the thing about a wall built that slowly. The people who build it forget they are building. They think they are just living. They do not feel the floor under the wall, and they certainly do not notice when, one quiet year, someone buys the floor. I bought Lindenhall in the spring of 2025. I did not buy it to win anything. I need you to believe that, because everything that came after only makes sense if you believe it. Lindenhall was the finest restaurant in the town where I grew up, the place where the Strouds had celebrated every anniversary and graduation I was never invited to. The white tablecloth room at the center of a town that had watched my mother get frozen out and had not lifted a finger. When it came up for sale, quietly, because the old owner was tired and his knees were bad and his children did not want it, my holding company was the natural buyer. I almost did not do it. I sat with the listing for a week. And then I realized that I had been treating that whole town like a room I was not allowed in, and that I was 41 years old and tired of standing on the wrong side of walls, and that I could simply buy the best room in it and make it mine. So I did. I signed the papers in a notary's office with Joelle beside me and the old owner across the table. And when it was done, I drove to Lindenhall and walked through the empty dining room in the afternoon light and stood at the head of the long table by the window. And I felt something I had not felt in that town since before my mother died. I felt like I had a right to be there. I did not buy it to win anything. I bought it because it was the best room in the town that raised me, and I had finally stopped asking that town's permission to love it. I became a regular in my own restaurant, which is a stranger thing than it sounds. Most owners hover or hide. I did neither. I came in most Thursdays and sat at the head table by the window and ate Inez's food and drank a glass of the Sancerre and talked to the staff. And over the year, they learned my habits the way a good house learns its owner. Tomas knew my wine. The kitchen knew I liked the bread a little darker. Gabriel knew that the head of the long table was mine, and that on the rare nights I brought Joelle, we sat there together, and that on the more common nights I came alone and sat there anyway content, the owner at the head of her own room. That was the ground. That was the floor under the wall. And then, in the spring of 2026, my Aunt Beverly called Lindenhall to book the entire upstairs for the family reunion, and she gave the name Stroud, and she had no idea, none at all, that she was holding her exclusion of me on the one square of earth where I was not the outsider, but the center. Gabriel told me about the booking, the way he told me about all the big bookings, reading from the reservation tablet in my office on a Monday, large party, full upstairs, Saturday in May, name of Stroud, deposit paid. I felt the name land in my chest. I kept my face still because I have a great deal of practice keeping my face still, and Gabriel, who reads faces for a living, watched mine anyway. Friends of yours? He asked lightly. Family, I said. He waited, the way good managers wait, leaving a space in case I wanted to fill it. Treat them like any other party, I said. Full service, nothing special. You got it, he said, and he made a note, and he did not ask the question that was sitting in the room, which was, then why does your face look like that? He read me the name off the book and watched my face and let it go, and I did not tell him they were mine. I did not tell him anything. I did not yet know that I would need to. For 10 days, I did not decide whether to go. I told Joelle I might not. I told myself it would be undignified, that the whole point of the life I had built was that I did not need them, and that showing up uninvited to a party in my own restaurant was beneath me. All of that was true, and underneath all of it was the 12-year-old at the kitchen counter watching her mother laugh a small laugh and let the little things go, and that 12-year-old wanted, with an intensity that embarrassed me, to stand in the room. Then, the week before the reunion, Beverly called me directly. That was rare enough to be an event. I let it go to voicemail, and then I listened, standing in my kitchen at home, and her voice was as warm and smooth as it had been on the wedding voicemail 8 years before. The warmth that had no warmth in it at all. Hi, hun, she said. I just wanted to catch you before the weekend so there's no awkwardness. The reunion's a close family thing this year, just the immediate family and the kids. You know how it gets. We had to draw the line somewhere. I didn't want you driving all that way for nothing. You understand. She had called to make sure the door was shut, in case I had somehow not heard it close the last 6 times. She had taken time out of her day, dialed my number, and used her real human voice to make my smallness explicit, and she had done it kindly, which was the worst part. The kindness, the genuine belief that she was sparing me something. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I felt the old pull to text back. Oh, of course, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. The gracious response, my mother's response, the carrots and the small laugh. My thumb was actually moving toward the screen, and then I looked at the counter where I had left the printed proof for the reunion's menu, the one Inez and I had built, because of course the upstairs party would eat my food off my plates, and I saw my own restaurant's name at the top of the page, and I saw the dishes I had tasted off a spoon 3 days running, and I had a single clear thought that rearranged something permanent in me. I was about to skip my own restaurant. I was about to stand my staff up, miss a Saturday service, and stay home alone in order to spare Beverly Stroud the discomfort of seeing my face in a room I owned. I was going to make myself disappear so that the people who had spent 20 years making me disappear would not have to do the work that night. That was the moment the asking stopped. Not the anger, I want to be clear. Not a hot rush of anger, nothing cinematic. It was quieter than that, and much more final. It was the moment I realized I had been doing their job for them my whole life, holding the wall up from my side, and that I could simply set it down. They had asked me one more time to make myself smaller. It was the last time I would ever consider it. But deciding to go was not the same as deciding what to do once I was there. And here is where the part of me that some people would have used differently has to be explained, because I think it is the most important choice in the whole story. I could have closed the upstairs. I owned it. A single phone call, and the reunion would have had no room. I could have let them arrive to a locked door and a polite host explaining that there had been an issue with the booking. I could have had their reservation simply vanish, the way I had vanished from theirs, and there would have been a clean, cold poetry to it. I could have done worse, in the small ways that are available to an owner. I could have had them seated at the worst table, near the kitchen doors, in the draft. I could have let the service go slow and indifferent. I could have walked in at the end and presented the check personally and watched them understand. I sat with all of it the afternoon of the reunion, in my office above the wine room, and I found that I wanted none of it. I want to tell you why, because it took me most of my life to learn it. Revenge needs an audience. It needs the other person to watch you do the thing, to feel the thing, to know that you did it on purpose. Revenge is a performance, and the moment you start performing, the people who wronged you become your director. They are still in charge. They are still the center of your life, just in a new costume. I had spent 20 years with the Strouds at the center of my life, in the shape of a wound. I was not going to keep them there in the shape of a target. Dignity is different. Dignity does not need an audience. Dignity only needs you to stop flinching. And the most dignified thing I could do, the thing that would land harder than any locked door, was the smallest thing imaginable. I could simply walk into my own restaurant and sit in my own chair and be, without apology, the person I actually was. I would not throw them out. I would not slow their service. I would not present a check. I would let the truth do its own quiet arithmetic, at its own speed, with no help from me. So that afternoon, I gave Gabriel exactly one instruction in the dining room, with Inez standing nearby drying her hands on a towel. "The Stroud party tonight," I said. "They're guests. Full service, nothing special, nothing withheld. Treat them beautifully. That's the whole job." "Always do," Gabriel said. "And Gabriel," I said, "I'll be coming up at some point. I'll take my usual seat when I do." He looked at me for a moment, and I watched him understand more than I had said, the way he understood most things. And he did not smile, and he did not frown. He just nodded once, the nod of a professional accepting a complicated assignment without needing it explained. "Your usual," he said. Of course. I could have closed the upstairs. I could have made their reservation disappear. I wanted none of it. I wanted to walk in as myself and let the truth do its own quiet arithmetic. I caught my own reflection in the dark glass of the wine room door on my way out, a woman of 42 in a good gray dress, no weapon in her hands, and I thought, this is the smallest possible action, and it is going to be enough. Dignity is not the same as revenge. Revenge needs an audience. Dignity only needs you to stop flinching. I had finally, at 42, stopped flinching. So now you understand the chair. You understand why, when Gabriel Moss crossed that crowded private room and pulled out the seat at the head of the long table and said, "Your usual," it was not a trick I had sprung. It was simply the truth, walking into the room on its own legs, wearing a manager's suit. He gave me my chair because it was my chair, and the silence that rolled down the table was the sound of a 20-year-old story meeting a fact it could not absorb. I sat. I thanked Gabriel by name, and then I looked down the table. Beverly recovered first, because Beverly always recovered first. She set down her fork after that small, clear chime, and she gathered the warmth back into her face, and she reached for the old script, the script that had never once failed her in 20 years. "Adrienne," she said, and her voice carried down the table, pleasant and firm, the voice of a woman correcting a seating error. "Sweetheart, this is a family-only evening. I did tell you. I'm sure there's been some mix-up with the staff." A mix-up with the staff. I almost admired it. Even now, even with the manager standing beside me, having just called the chair mine, her instinct was to make it my error, A misunderstanding, a thing to be smoothed over and corrected, with me gently walked back toward the door. I did not get the chance to answer her, and this is the part I love most, because I did not have to. Before I could say a word, Tomas Ferreira appeared at my elbow with a glass of white wine that I had not ordered, condensation already beating on the bowl of it, and he set it down in front of me with the easy fondness of a man doing a small kindness for his boss. "The Sancerre you like, he said. "On the house." Then he grinned, because he thought he was among friends, because he had no idea what room he had just walked into. "Well, it's all on the house for you, isn't it?" He laughed. A couple of the cousins laughed politely with him, not understanding. And I watched my Aunt Beverly's face as the sentence reached her. "On the house for you, isn't it?" And I watched her begin, for the first time, to feel the floor under the wall. Tomas did not mean to detonate anything. He was being kind to his boss, in front of strangers he assumed were friends. That is the thing about the truth when you stop forcing it. It does not need you. It has 100 small, honest mouths. It was my younger cousin Brett who said it out loud finally, who could not stand the not knowing. He leaned toward a passing server, a young man named Devin, whom I had hired in January, and he asked, with the slightly too loud confidence of a man who has had 2 glasses of wine, why exactly that woman was being given the head of the table and free wine at his family's private event. And Devin, who was 19, in earnest, and had no idea there was anything delicate happening, answered the way you answer a simple, factual question. "That's where the owner sits, sir," he said. The word went down the table like a draft under a door. "Owner." Brett repeated it, half to himself, half to Colleen beside him. The owner. The whole room, all 26 of them, turned to look at me, at the woman they had spent 20 years politely not seeing, sitting at the head of the table in front of the window with a glass of wine that was in fact on the house, because the house was hers. I watched 20 years of a story I had been written out of get read back to its authors, in a sentence none of them could revise. There was no revising owner. There was no mix-up with the staff that produced owner. Beverly's mouth opened and closed. When she finally spoke, the smoothness was gone from her voice, and what was left underneath it was small and uncertain. Almost a child's voice. "You own this," she said. It was not quite a question. "Since last year," I said. I kept my voice even. I was not performing calm. I simply was calm, which surprised me as much as anyone. "The whole building. I didn't think it was a close family thing." I had waited 2 decades for a reckoning, and I discovered, in the moment it finally came, that I did not want to twist it. I had 100 sharp things I could have said. I had the wedding voicemail memorized. I had every oversight, every you understand, every holiday spent at work, all of it loaded and ready. And I found that I did not want to fire any of it. I only wanted the one true sentence, "I own this." I only wanted it to be true out loud, in front of all of them once. The truth needed no weapon. It needed only a server's kindness and a chair. What happened next did not happen all at once. Reckonings in real life are not tidy. The room did not gasp and fall to its knees. What happened was that the temperature of the entire evening changed, the way a room changes when a window is opened in winter, and everyone in it began, privately, to recalculate. The first thing that happened was the strangest, and if you have ever been the family scapegoat, you will know it instantly. They got warm. Within 10 minutes of the word owner traveling down the table, cousins who had not spoken to me in a decade were remembering loudly how close we had been as children. An aunt by marriage told me she had always said I was the talented one. Brett, red-faced, leaned across 2 seats to tell me he had eaten at Lindenhall a dozen times, and it was the best food in the county, and wasn't it wild, wasn't it just the best story, that it had been me all along. I had walked in braced for the cold. I had not braced for the warmth, and the warmth was worse, because the warmth was a confession. Every person who suddenly remembered loving me was admitting, in the same breath, that the love had always been available, and had simply been withheld until I became useful, until I became someone worth knowing, until the woman with no money and the wrong father turned out to own the room. Colleen did not get warm. Colleen got defensive, which I almost respected, because at least it was honest. She found me near the window later in the evening, after the dinner had loosened, and she stood with her arms folded and her chin up, and she said the thing I think a lot of them were feeling. "Well," she said, "you could have told us. All this time. You let us all sit here not knowing. That's kind of a cruel thing to do, Adrian, if you think about it." I looked at her for a moment. Colleen had spent years not telling me where dinner was, where the weddings were, where the family was. She had been part of a chat that ran for a decade without my name in it. And now, standing in my restaurant, She had arrived at the conclusion that the cruelty in our family was my silence about owning a building. "You're right," I said, and I watched the surprise on her face. "I could have told you. I thought about it. And then I thought about how telling you things had worked out for my mother and for me for the last 40 years. And I decided to spend my energy somewhere it grew." She did not have an answer for that. She uncrossed and recrossed her arms and said something about how it was all very complicated and walked back toward the warmer end of the table. She had spent years not telling me where dinner was. Now my silence was the crime. I was too tired to be angry about it. It was almost funny. The one conversation that mattered that night happened on the landing, by the stairs, with the squeak in the third step. I had stepped out of the room to breathe, and my Uncle Stuart followed me. Stuart had always been the quiet one, Beverly's husband, a man who had spent 40 years standing slightly behind his wife and saying nothing, and I had never expected anything from him, which is maybe why what he said landed the way it did. He stood beside me at the railing, looking down into the empty front of the restaurant, and for a while he did not say anything at all. Then he said, "Your mother got the same treatment. Frances, same exact thing. We just did it slower to her, over more years." He paused. I never said a word. 40 years, I never once said a word. I should have. I held very still. "I told myself it wasn't my family to fix," he went on. "Beverly's sister, Beverly's people, not my place. That's a coward's math, and I knew it was a coward's math while I was doing it." He looked at me then, an old man with wet eyes, nothing smooth about him at all. "I'm sorry, Adrienne, for her and for you. It's late. I know it's late." It was the first honest sentence anyone in that family had handed me in 20 years. I held it carefully, the way you hold something that arrived too late to save anything, but is still, somehow, worth keeping. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it, and I also did not pretend it healed anything, because it could not, and Stuart was honest enough not to ask it to. That was the fallout. In the room, on the night. But the wall did not finish falling that night. It kept falling over the following weeks quietly the way it had been built. Because here is what happens when a story like family only meets a fact like she owns the building. The story does not just lose one night. It loses its credibility going backward. All the relatives who had not been at the reunion heard about it within days, and the question they all asked, the question Beverly could not answer, was simple. If Adrienne was so impossible, so distant, so much not really family, then how did she come to own Lindenhall? And why did the staff love her? And why was there a chair that was always hers? The wall had depended on everyone agreeing not to look at it. The chair made it impossible not to look. And once they looked, the whole structure stopped being something I had done by being difficult and started being something they had done on purpose for 20 years to a woman whose only crime was her father's hands. The wall did not fall on me. It fell on the people who kept building it. I heard about the weeks after in pieces, mostly from Nina later, and a little from Stuart, who had decided, late in life, to start telling the truth and found he could not stop. There was a cousin in another state, a woman named Gail, whom I had met perhaps twice, who called Beverly to ask, gently, whether it was true, whether the family had really frozen out Frances's daughter for 20 years over nothing, and whether that daughter had really gone on to quietly own the restaurant where they held every celebration. Beverly, I am told, tried the old music, the "it's complicated," the "you weren't there," the "she chose to keep her distance." But the music did not play the way it always had, because there was a chair now and a manager who called it mine and a glass of wine on the house. And you cannot explain a chair like that with the word complicated. Gail did not let it go. Gail, it turned out, had been frozen out of something herself once, by other people, and she knew the sound of the machine when she heard it running. For the first time in my life, the burden of explanation shifted. For 40 years, the question in that family had been quietly, what is wrong with Adrienne and her mother before her that they are not really one of us? Now the question was, out loud, in living rooms across 3 states, what did we do to them and why? And what does it say about us that it took a chair to make us ask? I did not ask those questions. I did not have to. I had spent 2 decades being the family's unspoken answer, and now they had to sit with the question themselves, and I was finally free to put it down and walk away from the whole conversation. I would like to tell you that I felt triumphant. I did not. I felt the thing nobody warns you about, which is the cost. Lindenhall closes at 11 on a Saturday, and that night, after the last of the Strouds had gone, after the warm ones had pressed their numbers on me, and the cold ones had left without saying goodbye, and Stuart had squeezed my hand on the stairs, I sat alone at the head of the long table by the window in the empty room, and Inez came out of the kitchen with 2 glasses and a bottle and sat down beside me without being asked. She did not say anything useful. She did not tell me I had won because she could see that I had not, exactly. She poured the wine and she sat with me in the quiet of the room we had built, and after a while she said, "You okay, boss?" And I said, "I will be." And she said, "Yeah." And that was the whole conversation, and it was the kindest thing anyone said to me all night. I had thought the truth coming out would feel like winning. It did not. It felt like setting down a bag I had carried so long that I had stopped noticing the weight, and finding once it was down that my hands did not know what to do with themselves. Empty. Because I was grieving. That was the thing I had not expected. I was not grieving the family I lost that night. I was grieving the family I had been inventing in my head for 20 years, the one where, if I just achieved enough, became enough, built enough, they would finally turn and see me and open the door and say, "There you are, we were wrong, come in." That family had never existed. I had built it out of hope and held it in a back room of my heart and fed it for 2 decades. And the chair, by making the truth so plain, had finally let it die. And you grieve a thing you fed for 20 years, even when it was never real, maybe especially then. There was a photograph of my mother in my office on the shelf above the desk, Frances at maybe 30, laughing at something out of frame, my father's shoulder just visible at the edge. I went up and looked at it after Inez went home. I had wanted them to see me so badly my whole life that I had never properly noticed the people who already did. The chef who sat with me in an empty room, the man who poured the wine because it was on the house, because the house was mine, the partner who had told me, plainly, that I owed them nothing, and had been right, and had stayed close enough to catch me. I sat with the photograph for a long time that night. I thought about all the years I had spent achieving, the restaurants stacked one on top of another, and I asked myself an honest question, the kind you can only ask at midnight in an empty room. How much of this did I build for me, and how much did I build as an argument, a case I was assembling year by year, to present one day to a jury of Strouds who would finally be forced to acquit me? The answer was uncomfortable. A great deal of it had been the argument. And the cruelty of an argument like that is that the jury never convenes. They do not sit up nights weighing your achievements. They simply go on with their lives, comfortable, while you build and build, addressing a courtroom that is empty. The chair had not won the case. The chair had dismissed it. The chair had told me there was no case, there had never been a case, and that I could stop being my own prosecutor and my own defendant and simply go home and live. Being proven right was small and cold. Being free was the thing I had actually been after the whole time. And freedom, it turned out, was not a moment at a head table. It was the slow work of turning toward the people who had been pouring me wine for years, and learning finally to drink it. The weeks after settled the way water settles, finding its real level, and I let it. Beverly wrote me a letter, an actual letter, on her good stationery, 3 pages. I read it once. It was a masterpiece of a particular kind, full of warmth and reframing, full of how she had always loved me, how things had been complicated, how she hoped we could put the past behind us and start fresh now that we all understood each other better. There was an apology in it, technically, the way there is sometimes a single vegetable in a very large dessert. And there was, threaded all through it, the new music I had been hearing all night at the reunion. The music of a person who has discovered that the relative she discarded is worth having after all. I did not answer it. I did not answer it out of cruelty, and I did not answer it out of anger. I did not answer it because I had finally learned that you do not have to attend every conversation you are invited to, and that some doors, once you are standing in the warmth of your own house, you can simply leave shut. I filed the letter in a drawer. Severance, clean. I do not expect we will speak again, and I have made my peace with that, which is different from being glad about it. Colleen, I have not heard from, and I do not expect to. That door is closed too, and I closed it gently, and I do not stand near it. But there was Nina. Nina was 24, Colleen's daughter, and she had been a child the last time anyone in the family let me near her, and she had grown up entirely inside the story, on the far side of a wall she had not built, and had never been told the reason for. A week after the reunion, she sent me a message, and it was not warm in the new way, the useful way. It was awkward and ashamed and real. She asked if she could buy me a coffee. So we met at a little place across town, neutral ground, and she sat across from me, twisting a napkin, and she said the thing that none of the adults had been honest enough to say. "I've been thinking about it all week," she said, And I realized I don't actually know anything about you. I grew up just sort of knowing you were, not around. And nobody ever said why, and I never asked, and that's kind of horrible, isn't it? That I never asked. She looked up at me. I didn't know any of it. The stuff with your mom, any of it. I want to actually know you, if that's allowed, if it's not too late. I looked at this young woman who had inherited a wall and was, alone among all of them, choosing to take a brick out of it with her own hands. And I felt something I had not felt toward a single Stroud in 20 years. I felt the possibility of something new. It's allowed, I said. It's not too late. We can start from here. I left the door open exactly 1 inch, which was more than her mother had ever left for me, and I have come to understand that an inch, freely given, is enough. We have had 3 coffees since. I am not pretending it is a healed family. It is 1 young person and 1 older one, building something small and honest from scratch, and that is more than the wall ever produced. The rest of my life closed up around the empty space the family had occupied, and to my surprise, the space was not large. That is the secret nobody tells you about the people who are always at the center of your wound. They feel enormous, and then one day, you set them down, and you see they were taking up far less room than the part of you that kept them. It is a Thursday in June now, early evening, and I am sitting where I am always sitting, at the head of the long table by the window at Linden Hall. Gabriel just walked the first reservation of the night up the squeaking stairs. Inez has a new dish she wants me to taste, more acid than the last one. She has learned my notes. Tomas is telling a server about his son, who got a hit this time, who rounded the bases while his father missed it because he was working, the way I missed 20 years of a family because I was working. Except that Tomas chose his work and loves it, and goes home to a house full of people who know exactly where he is. Joelle is meeting me here at 8, and we will sit at this table together, 2 women who built 9 restaurants out of 1 failing bistro, and we will drink the Sancerre, and it will be on the house, because the house is mine. I stopped setting a place at my life for people who would only sit if I shrank the chair. The head table had been mine all along. I just finally stopped apologizing for sitting in it. So let me turn to you now, because if you have stayed with me this long, I suspect you know exactly which room I am talking about. I suspect there is a chair somewhere, at some table, that you have spent years standing beside, waiting to be told you are allowed to sit. If you are the one they keep forgetting to invite, hear me. You do not have to burn their house down. You do not have to win. You do not have to make them sorry. And you certainly do not have to make yourself smaller so that the people who never had room for you can stay comfortable. You only have to stop knocking on doors that were built to stay shut. Turn around. Walk to the table you made with your own 2 hands, the one full of the people who learned your name before it meant anything, who pour your wine before you ask, who sit with you in the quiet when the room empties out. Go sit down at the head of it. The people who belong in your life will already know your usual. Take care of yourself. I will see you at the next one.